In a tense Baltic morning, 3 Russian MiG-31 Foxhounds streaked into Estonian airspace, confident, fast, and unaware they were flying into a digital trap. What began as a simple provocation turned into a 12-minute showcase of modern warfare. NATO's invisible hunters, Italian F-35A Lightning IIs and Swedish JS-39E Gripens, used network-centric tactics, electronic warfare, and meteor missiles to cripple Russia's most advanced interceptors without firing a single shot. In that short window, speed, altitude, and power proved useless against stealth, data, and precision. The encounter redefined air dominance and reshaped NATO's rules of engagement across Europe. But what truly happens when raw power meets invisible control in the skies of the 21st century? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the battles shaping our world. At NOR 742 that morning, 3 Russian MiG-31 Foxhound interceptors roared off the runway at Chkalov Air Base, their engines shattering the silence across the tarmac. Within minutes, they climbed through the upper layers of the stratosphere, stabilizing at 45,000 feet. Their mission was officially classified as a routine training flight, but the flight path told another story. The route curved directly toward Estonian airspace, along a vector known to trigger NATO's radar grid. The intent was clear: to test, provoke, and measure the reaction of the alliance's eastern defenses. Flying in tight formation, the pilots felt untouchable. The MiG-31's Mach 2.83 top speed and service ceiling of 82,000 feet gave them confidence few aircraft could match. Each cockpit glowed with the familiar green light of the Zaslon M passive electronically scanned array radar, capable of tracking dozens of aerial targets at once. To the Russian pilots, this was a show of dominance, a way to remind NATO that Russia's long-range interceptors could appear over the Baltic within minutes. When they crossed into Estonian airspace under the pretext of a navigation error, their transponders were off. The maneuver was intentional. They expected to trigger alarms, then retreat after a ceremonial NATO interception, returning home as heroes who had tested the enemy's patience. They even flew lower than optimal 45,000 feet, well beneath the MiG-31's ideal envelope, to make themselves easier to spot by NATO radar. The pilots joked over encrypted radio, confident that within minutes they would see a pair of F-16s scrambling from Lithuania for a harmless escort, but that confidence was misplaced. NATO's Combined Air Operations Center, CAOC UDEM in Germany, had already flagged the flight as high priority seconds after takeoff. The command's decision, however, was not to scramble fighters immediately. Instead, it chose patience. "Allow the targets to enter our airspace," the controller ordered. A calm, deliberate act that turned what looked like a provocation into a rare opportunity. For NATO, this wasn't an intrusion. It was a live electronic warfare experiment. As the Russian formation swept across the Gulf of Finland, the pilots felt emboldened by the lack of reaction. 5 minutes passed, then 10, still no intercept. They took it as cowardice. Laughter echoed through the comms as they cruised above Hythema Island, their radars painting a picture of harmless civilian traffic. Yet what they didn't realize was that they themselves were being tracked, mapped, and dissected in real time by an invisible web of Western sensors. 80 kilometers to the southwest, 2 Italian F-35A Lightning II fighters lifted off silently from Ämari Air Base in Estonia. Flying in MCON maximum communication silence, they hugged low altitudes, their radar signatures blending with the background clutter. Using the AAPG-81 AESA radar in low probability of intercept LPI mode, they began tracking the MiG-31s with surgical precision. Every metric, speed, altitude, engine heat, radar output was recorded and transmitted through encrypted data links to an E3 ETOWAC circling hundreds of kilometers away. The F-35s were ghosts. Their emissions were nearly undetectable to the MiG-31's outdated radar warning receivers. The Russian pilots, unaware they were already targeted, flew on confidently. Meanwhile, the F-35s acted as data hubs, vacuuming up every electromagnetic signature the MiGs produced. Radar sweeps, frequency hops, even minor fluctuations in power output. Within minutes, the alliance possessed a complete electronic profile of one of Russia's most advanced interceptors. It was an autopsy of the electronic soul of the MiG-31. Dozens of kilometers westward, 2 Swedish JS-39E Gripen fighters joined the operation. Linked through Link 16 to the F-35s, they flew parallel to the Russian route with their own radars switched off, relying entirely on the network's shared vision. These were not standard Gripens. The JS-39E, often referred to unofficially as the Russian Hunter, was designed specifically for countering advanced adversaries. Its Raven ES-05 AESA radar and Erexis electronic warfare suite gave it both stealth and lethality. But its greatest weapon was not a missile, it was connectivity. It could fight using the sensors of every friendly unit in the network as if they were its own eyes. At CAOC UAGM, the command came through in a single word: engage. Inside the Russian cockpits, everything changed in seconds. The Zaslon M radar displays began to distort, flooded with meaningless signals and phantom contacts. At first, the pilots thought it was a software glitch. Then their radios erupted in static. Within moments, their communication links died completely. The MiG-31s had been struck by a coordinated electronic warfare attack from the Gripen's Arexis system. Seconds later, the radar warning receivers screamed, a tone of intense, continuous lock-on alerts. Through the glare of the canopy, the Russians finally saw them, two small silhouettes rising fast, their wingtip pylons glowing faintly under the morning sun. Each Gripen carried Meteor and Iris-T air-to-air missiles, their seekers already tracking. For the Russian pilots, it was a nightmare scenario. Their electronic awareness, their greatest strength, was gone. They were flying blind. The enemy, operating entirely on network-fed intelligence, had seized total control of the battle space. As panic spread through the MiG formation, the situation worsened. On their sensors, now barely functioning, new contacts appeared. Two F-35s had joined the fray, their radar signatures faint but unmistakable. The Russians were now trapped between 4 aircraft, 2 stealth fighters below, and 2 electronic warfare predators ahead. The calm voice of an Italian pilot came over the open emergency frequency. Russian aircraft, you have been in NATO airspace for 12 minutes. Your systems are under our control. Multiple missiles are locked on your position. You will return to Russian airspace immediately. This is not a warning, it is an order. That single transmission shattered the illusion of superiority built over decades of propaganda. The MiG-31's immense power meant nothing. Their radars were useless metal, their speed irrelevant. They had been defeated before a single shot was fired. The Russian flight leader hesitated only for a second before obeying the inevitable. He banked hard eastward, his wingmen following in tight formation. 3 silver arcs curved across the pale sky, symbols of retreat. The Gripens held their locks until the last second, ensuring the MiGs crossed back into neutral airspace. Behind them, the F-35s silently shadowed the withdrawal, recording everything, their flight paths, their emergency comms, even the subtle oscillations of their engines under stress. When the radar blips finally disappeared from Estonian skies, CAOC UDEM erupted in quiet satisfaction. Not relief, satisfaction. NATO had executed a perfect operation. No shots fired, no losses, and yet a total tactical victory. This was more than a routine air policing mission. It was the first real demonstration of NATO's network-centric warfare doctrine against a live Russian target. In 12 minutes, the alliance had shown that speed and altitude meant nothing against integrated intelligence and coordinated electronic dominance. The MiG-31s returned home to debriefings and silence. Their mission logs would say training complete, but every pilot aboard knew the truth. They had just experienced the future of aerial warfare and lost. In the aftermath of the encounter, the 3 MiG-31s streaked eastward toward Russian airspace, their retreat recorded from multiple NATO platforms. On the massive digital wall inside CAOC UDEM, the red icons marking the intruders slowly disappeared beyond Estonia's boundary line. There was no cheering in the operations room, only the quiet hum of servers and the steady rhythm of analysts collecting terabytes of sensor data. What NATO had achieved in those 12 minutes was not merely the expulsion of hostile aircraft, but the dismantling of a myth that raw speed and altitude could still guarantee dominance in the 21st century battle space. The data harvested from the F-35's LPI ASA radar, the Gripen's Arexis suite, and the AWACS network provided a complete portrait of the MiG-31's vulnerabilities, its emissions, latency cycles, radar refresh times, and power fluctuations. For intelligence officers, it was a goldmine. For Russian Aviation Command, it was an embarrassment waiting to surface. The incident was immediately labeled September 19th airspace violation and classified at the highest level within both alliances. What made the defeat especially painful for Moscow was that no missile had been launched. The aircraft, celebrated in Russia as symbols of invincibility, had been rendered powerless by invisible frequencies. NATO's combination of stealth, sensor fusion, and coordinated electronic warfare had demonstrated that information superiority outweighed kinetic firepower. However, questions remained. Could the same tactics succeed if a MiG-31 operated at its true strength Mach 2.83 and 80,000 feet, at the edge of the stratosphere, far beyond the altitude of most Western fighters? The analysis that followed answered with stark clarity, yes. The very characteristics that made the MiG-31 formidable also made it fatally predictable. The Foxhound was never designed for agile combat. It was built as a long-range interceptor, engineered to destroy American bombers and cruise missiles during the Cold War. Its enormous frame, twin-engine configuration, and heavy radar made it brutally fast but aerodynamically crude. At Mach 2.8, the aircraft could not sustain high G turns. Its turning radius exceeded several tens of kilometers, and any abrupt maneuver risked structural failure or engine flameout in the thin upper atmosphere. This meant that while the MiG-31 could outrun almost anything, it could not outmaneuver a modern missile. Moreover, its infrared and radar signatures betrayed it completely. Physics was merciless. Friction at nearly 3 times the speed of sound turned its titanium skin into a glowing infrared beacon visible to electro-optical targeting systems, EOTS, like those on the F-35. For missiles such as the AIM-9X Sidewinder or the MBDA Meteor, this radiant heat made the MiG-31 an ideal target even from hundreds of kilometers away. On radar, the Doppler effect distinguished its extreme velocity instantly. Stealth was impossible. The September 19 engagement had also exposed another crippling weakness: electronic vulnerability. The MiG-31's avionics suite and radar warning receivers belonged to an earlier era, lacking digital processing speed and adaptive algorithms. The RXS jammers on the Gripen E didn't just overwhelm the MiG sensors, they exploited these legacy architectures to inject false targets and ghost echoes. The Foxhound pilots had been fighting phantoms projected by their own systems. Under NATO's newly adopted engagement rules, another deliberate airspace violation would not end with a warning. It would end with a kill order. For planners at UIDEM, the question was straightforward. If forced to shoot, could NATO fighters actually down a MiG-31 at full altitude and velocity? The answer lay in the network itself. NATO's strength was not dependent on any single aircraft, but on the seamless integration of sensors, radars, and missile platforms. The F-35 Lightning II, the Gripen E, and the Eurofighter Typhoon could all act as shooters or spotters interchangeably, sharing a single data picture. This distributed lethality meant that any aircraft within the network could engage a target using another platform's sensors. Consider a hypothetical interception. An F-35 detects a MiG-31 at 200 kilometers while flying at 50,000 feet. The data is transmitted through Link 16 to a Gripen E cruising nearby. The Gripen's pilot doesn't need to see the target. He simply fires a Meteor missile based on the F-35's targeting data. The Meteor represents the pinnacle of Western beyond visual range weaponry. Unlike standard air-to-air missiles that rely solely on solid fuel motors, the Meteor uses a ramjet engine, allowing it to maintain continuous thrust throughout its flight. After launch, it performs a loft maneuver, climbing steeply toward 80,000 feet. Where conventional missiles lose speed and stall, the Meteor's ramjet ignites, propelling it beyond Mach 4 over 4,900 kilometers. In a head-on engagement, a MiG-31 traveling at Mach 2.83 would face a closing speed of nearly Mach 7. By the time its warning receivers detected the incoming missile, the engagement window would be less than 10 seconds. Evading at that altitude was physically impossible. A single defensive roll could tear the airframe apart. Even in a rear aspect chase scenario, the Meteor's 200-kilometer range and no escape zone ensured interception. Its guidance system, fed continuously by the firing aircraft and by AWACS relays, allowed mid-course corrections all the way to impact. The MiG-31's enormous thermal signature would do the rest, guiding the missile unerringly to its target. The secondary option within NATO's arsenal, the AIM-120D AMRAAM, posed a similar threat. Though shorter range than the Meteor, it combined a two-way data link with a powerful new motor that sustained speeds around Mach 4. Even if it lost momentum near the end of its trajectory, its early speed advantage forced MiG-31 pilots into violent evasive maneuvers that drained energy and altitude, leaving them vulnerable to follow-up attacks. By late evening, when CAOC analysts finalized their report, one conclusion was unavoidable. In any future confrontation, the MiG-31 would not escape alive. Across the Baltic region, political aftershocks followed quickly. Representatives from Estonia, Poland, and Sweden gathered under closed doors to discuss the implications. For years, NATO's air policing missions had operated under restrained rules of engagement: escort and warn, never fire. That restraint, they argued, had emboldened Moscow. Russia had learned to exploit NATO's predictability. It crossed lines knowing the response would stop short of escalation, but September 19 changed that calculus. With German support, the Baltic states pushed for a new deterrence protocol, a clear authorization to use lethal force if provoked again. This is not a declaration of war, one Estonian delegate stated. It is a message across the chessboard. The next move will carry a cost. After several days of negotiations, the alliance adopted the new engagement rules. The revised doctrine emphasized preemption and proportional retaliation, granting frontline units authority to fire once hostile intent was verified through the network. In essence, the decision removed the final psychological shield that had allowed Russian pilots to treat Baltic skies as a playground. Strategically, the message was unmistakable. NATO's deterrence was no longer symbolic. It was enforced by data, connectivity, and precision. Any future violation would risk not just diplomatic outrage, but the destruction of billion-dollar aircraft and elite pilots. The era of cost-free provocations was over. As one analyst summarized in the closing line of the CAOC report, the next MiG-31 that crosses the line won't be warned. It will simply vanish from the screen. When the 3 MiG-31 icons vanished from radar, the operations center at CAOC UIDEM entered a deliberate silence. No applause, no celebration, just the calm after a clinical execution. The mission log read, "Intrusion repelled, no engagement required," but the significance went far beyond a routine intercept. In 12 minutes, NATO had turned an incursion into a demonstration of the 21st century warfare model, a networked strike web where data replaced bullets and dominance came from invisibility. Engineers and analysts immediately began dissecting the sensor recordings. Every pulse from the Zaslon M radar, every data link burst, and every radio emission captured by the F-35's passive sensors was archived for electronic exploitation. For Western intelligence, it was a once-in-a-decade opportunity. The digital fingerprint of Russia's most advanced interceptor mapped in full spectral detail. Technicians at Ramstein and Lockheath spent days reconstructing the MiG-31's electronic signature, identifying frequency bands, scan patterns, and timing intervals. This intelligence would feed directly into NATO's electronic order of battle, ensuring that the next time a Foxhound took off, its emissions could be recognized and jammed instantly. Inside Russian command circles, the tone was the opposite. The debrief at Shkalov Air Base was tense and short. Each pilot's account matched the same humiliating reality: total system blackout, zero situational awareness, and the overwhelming sense of being watched by unseen enemies. Moscow's defense analyst knew what it meant. The MiG-31, once a symbol of unreachable altitude and raw power, had been electronically dissected without a single missile fired. The Kremlin issued no public statement, but internal memoranda began circulating, calling for an urgent review of avionics modernization and electronic warfare countersuites. The catch: budget constraints and production bottlenecks made those upgrades a distant dream. In Washington, the incident reached the Oval Office within hours. President Trump's response was brief and unscripted. "I don't love it. I don't like it when that happens. They should be shot down if necessary." The remark, though casual, carried diplomatic weight. It signaled full American backing for an expanded deterrence posture in Europe. Within days, the Pentagon approved additional deployments of F-35A squadrons to Lockheath, Spangdahlem, and Amari, creating overlapping coverage arcs from the North Sea to the Baltic frontier. Strategically, the September 19 operation marked a doctrinal pivot for NATO. The alliance had moved beyond the era of air policing and into active air dominance enforcement. The rules of engagement were rewritten to reflect a new reality. In the modern battle space, hesitation equals vulnerability. What began as an incursion evolved into a full-scale systems test, a rehearsal for future conflict in which speed and altitude would no longer define superiority. From a technical standpoint, the encounter validated the effectiveness of network-centric warfare. The seamless integration between fourth-generation and fifth-generation platforms Gripen, Eurofighter, and F-35 created a shared situational picture that no single aircraft could achieve alone. It was not about who had the better radar or faster jet, but who could fuse information faster, distribute it wider, and act sooner. In this respect, NATO's real weapon was not the Meteor missile, but the data link. For the Russian aerospace forces, the event forced a painful reassessment of doctrine. The MiG-31's traditional advantage, outrunning the opponent, had become a liability. Once detected, its massive thermal signature and limited maneuver envelope made it the perfect victim for long-range precision missiles. Even the R-37M Axe-head, Russia's most advanced air-to-air weapon, offered little reassurance. Despite its range, it depended on radar guidance updates from the launching aircraft. Against F-35s operating in total emission silence, the missile would never receive those updates. In effect, the Foxhound could not shoot what it could not see. Behind closed doors, some Russian generals argued that the solution lay in electronic warfare parity, deploying Su-57s with L-band arrays and Kavini M jammers to counter NATO's network. Others proposed doubling down on hypersonic interceptors capable of outrunning any missile. But the underlying issue was structural. The Russian command and control system was still centralized, slow, and dependent on ground-based radar feeds. NATO's architecture, by contrast, was decentralized and adaptive. Each aircraft was both sensor and shooter, connected to a digital nervous system that stretched from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean. In Brussels, the policy shift was immediate. A special defense council comprising Estonia, Poland, Sweden, and Germany met under secrecy to finalize the Baltic Air Deterrence Protocol. The document outlined clear thresholds for engagement. Any unauthorized penetration beyond 20 kilometers would trigger automatic electronic suppression, followed by armed response if the intruder failed to retreat. For the first time since the Cold War, NATO authorized lethal defensive action without the need for political clearance from national capitals. The new protocol was not a declaration of aggression. It was a statement of confidence. The alliance's message to Moscow was simple: the next violation will not end with warnings. The deterrence model shifted from reactive diplomacy to proactive denial. Every subsequent Russian flight near Baltic airspace was now met with radar locks, tracking illumination, and a silent promise that escalation would be instantaneous. By late October, Russian reconnaissance missions in the region dropped sharply. Flight paths over the Gulf of Finland were rerouted northward towards safer corridors. At the same time, satellite imagery showed increased activity at Savostlika and Monchegorsk, where MiG-31 squadrons were being pulled back for recalibration and maintenance. The official narrative from Moscow described it as routine rotation. Western analysts saw it differently, a quiet retreat. For NATO, the success extended beyond the tactical. It sent a political signal across the alliance that integrated deterrence worked, that small nations like Estonia and Sweden, once viewed as vulnerable, could now rely on a real-time shield woven from sensors, satellites, and stealth. The psychological impact was as powerful as the technical one. In Warsaw and Tallinn, headlines read 12 minutes that changed the Baltic skies. Yet in the shadow of triumph, planners understood a deeper truth. The encounter had also exposed the fragility of balance. One miscalculation, one accidental lock-on or radar misinterpretation could have transformed that 12-minute ballet into open war. The very technology that enabled precision also compressed decision time to seconds. In such a system, deterrence depended not only on machines but on the discipline of those who commanded them. The September 19 interception thus became a cornerstone case study in modern air warfare. Military academies from Ankara to London incorporated it into electronic warfare curricula. The takeaway was clear. Supremacy now belonged to those who could see without being seen, strike without revealing themselves, and coordinate faster than thought. By the end of the year, NATO analysts summarized the event in a single line for the alliance's annual review. No weapons fired, no losses sustained, yet a strategic victory achieved. For the Russian pilots who had once laughed over the Baltic, that sentence was more painful than any missile strike. They had faced the future of warfare and found themselves flying relics of the past.
Against all odds, the objective was secured. A historic achievement.